Welcome back, everyone. We are here still broadcasting from my home, and welcome again to Crossroads. I'm sure many of you know that New York is on kind of semi-lockdown, not full lockdown. Basically, it's a work-from-home order. They've allegedly brought in the army. I haven't personally seen them yet, but also haven't been out a whole lot, so bear with me. The Army right now in New York is setting up temporary hospitals at these stadiums and at hotels. In the meantime, we have today ongoing coverage on the coronavirus, and I wanted to give an update on what's happening in China. Because as many of you know, I'm a senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times, and we just have some pretty good reporting on what's happening in China. We're of course blacklisted in China, but hey, that means we don't have to follow any of their censors. In fact, 2000-ish, we actually had reporters in China, all of whom were arrested. Our editor spent 10 years in prison. Now, as many of you know, the Chinese Communist Party's been saying, oh, there's no new cases in China, no new cases in China. Pretty much a lie. Well, it is a lie. Let me tell the history of this. The virus outbreak was a big deal, huge pandemic, all of China in panic. Then one day Xi Jinping comes out, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, and says, people need to get back to work, the economy is at risk. Basically, the state of the Chinese economy was that about a third of the companies in China were about to go out of business. And within maybe a few weeks to maybe a couple months, another third of the businesses in China were about to go out of business. So 2/3 of the businesses gone. They put a back to work order out and they said, oh, suddenly there's no new cases. The virus is over now. Everyone can go back to work. You know, how does it go from being massive pandemic, everybody panic, nobody leave your home, to next day, everything's all better, time to go back to work? That's what's been happening. And local officials in China can be punished if they report higher than approved numbers of cases. And so they have an incentive to not report cases. They cannot report cases without being punished. At the same time, too, we're still getting reports, because we've been calling into China, and people are sending us videos. We have videos of lines coming out of hospitals. People are saying they can't get basic care because the hospitals are filled with people who have the virus. And the Chinese Communist Party is now reporting some cases, but very few. Some of our Chinese reporters were making phone calls into Wuhan. They had some interesting interviews with people talking about the symptoms of this CCP virus. They're saying that they're very much like HIV. And so people who have this, it's very bizarre because they'll recover and then they'll get sick again. They'll relapse. As far as I know, normally it doesn't happen with flu-like diseases, flu-like viruses. A lot of people in China, because of this relapse, because people are relapsing from it, because it has HIV-like symptoms, they're worried the virus is still dormant in people who have recovered from it. And they're worried that there will be a second wave just from that. There's a very interesting series of events around findings that this virus may have parts of HIV in it. There was a scientific report that came out pointing to the data, the sequence of the virus, and showing that maybe actually it does appear to have parts of HIV in it somehow. Basically, the authors of that report were hugely attacked by the Chinese Communist Party and by its whole army of internet trolls. They ended up retracting their finding. That did not appear to be a natural or credible retraction. It appeared to be a retraction based on political pressure. Our Epoch Times reporters, Chinese staff, also interviewed people in Wuhan. One individual said that 6 family members, this individual had 6 family members, 2 of whom died. He said he recorded all the data on his phone, said his mom was not diagnosed with the virus. Even though she had gone to the hospital, even though she had all the symptoms, doctors in China refused to diagnose her with the virus. Doctors at the hospital, while he was going and trying to get help for his family, told him that between 5,000 and 6,000 people, this is in February, in Wuhan, said between 5,000 and 6,000 people had died just in Wuhan, and this is just what the doctor told him. He said he still hasn't received the ashes of his mother, and apparently this is a big deal, which, of course, this suggests, you might have seen some reports, people coming out and saying that, and of course, Epoch Times, we also called some of the crematoriums, basically they were operating 24/7. And so very likely they were disposing of bodies so quickly that they just didn't have time to save the ashes of people who they were burning. Epoch Times also, we went over some of the data in China on the cell phones. There are 21 million fewer cell phone accounts in China. And this is different than cell phone accounts in the US. In China, your cell phone account is tied to your social security number. It's tied to your health code. You cannot just get rid of your cell phone account. You can't do it. It's uniquely tied to a lot of your personal data. Bank account, social security account, health code, so on. Which some people are suggesting, which is a credible suggestion, could mean that, what happened to all those users. Did 21 million people die from this virus? Who knows? This individual is saying that some homes, all of the family members died. This is in Wuhan. He's talking about the local people. There are tons of broken families. Home by home by home, everybody's lost someone. He believes, based on the fact that you just don't find someone who didn't lose a family member or someone they knew. He believes the death numbers are much, much higher than what we're being told. And it's still unclear what that number is. Some tests, maybe this is getting into the kits, the test kits on seeing who has the virus. The tool used to diagnose cases. They're saying that they seem to be very unreliable in China. And individuals we talked to said that sometimes the first 5 tests will come out negative, 6 tests will be positive, saying you do have the virus. Maybe it's another positive, and then it'll say negative again. The test results seem to be all over the place. People who do have the virus test negative, then test positive. It's not reliable, it seems. This again would affect the numbers coming out of China. It would affect the number of cases we're able to track. Not to mention the fact that they're not being released, they're not being documented. People are being turned away from the hospitals in the first place. Anyone who's asymptomatic, even if you feel unwell, if you're not showing all the symptoms of the virus, you're being turned away, which is concerning because we know this virus has at least a 2-week gestation period. Some numbers have put it as high as 40 days. There was one woman who had a gestation period of 40 days. In other words, a period where you're able to spread the virus, but you're not showing symptoms of it. In Hong Kong, there's a very bizarre incident that took place as well, which ties into the reporting on this virus. This is original reporting by our Epoch Times staff in Hong Kong and from our New York office, communicating with different people. The Chinese Communist Party sent in 300 reporters to Hong Kong. And these individuals have to follow reporting from the main Chinese Communist Party media like Global Times, Xinhua, etc. Basically, this group is allegedly controlling the local reporting on the virus. And so media in Hong Kong are having to report in accordance with these standards. It's almost like this regulatory group of so-called reporters was sent in by the Chinese Communist Party, and they're controlling the local narratives. I'm sure many of you have seen, even on Twitter, how aggressive Chinese propagandists have been as of late, including, for example, the Chinese Communist Party ministry spokesperson, who individuals like Mike Pompeo have even been arguing with. This spokesperson has been coming out and trying to blame the virus on the United States, trying to say it was the US military that brought it to China, which is ridiculous and bizarre. And in other news, actually, China may have a new virus. There are at least some reports on this coming out. They call it the Hantan virus. We know very little about it currently, other than that one individual has died so far that we know of. The journal Nature, meanwhile, is warning of a second outbreak in China. It notes that there are 60% of people are asymptomatic or dormant. In other words, 60% of people who have the virus are not showing symptoms of it. People have it, they're still spreading it. There may be a second outbreak. Again, this ties into the fact, as I mentioned, basically Xi Jinping came out, warned that the economy in China was going to fail, said people need to get back to work. Suddenly, all the Chinese media, all the Chinese censors, all the propaganda outlets said, virus is over, get back to work. People were sent home from hospitals, people were sent out of quarantine, going back to work again. This means that people who are still infected were able to infect others, and there's now concern of a second wave outbreak in China. And as the journal Nature points out, just based on the asymptomatic cases, in other words, not even including people who had the virus but were sent home from the hospitals, there's a very large risk of a second wave outbreak in China. In China, there are 4 different provinces reporting cases of the virus, which is interesting because China keeps saying no new cases, no new cases. We know it's a lie, but when they start reporting cases, it means that they're doing it for a reason. You're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. This is how they work. If they start seeing large numbers of cases, they'll slowly introduce it into the narrative. Slowly let people start to believe that, okay, maybe something new is starting again, which means that very likely it's much worse than what they're saying. They already know it's an issue, and they're just saying now, get ready. Also, people in Hubei province, which is where Wuhan is, are questioning the low infection numbers. People are really, in China at least, they're not believing the government narrative. A lot of them are starting to see through it. Senator Gardner in the United States is warning about Chinese Communist Party propaganda against the United States, saying that it is a national security threat. And again, this goes back to propaganda like what the Chinese Communist Party ministry spokesperson is saying, claiming this virus came from the United States, claiming this is an American virus, claiming the U.S. military brought it to China. The funny thing is now they're saying it's from Italy. It's not America anymore, it's Italy. They're saying it's the Italian virus. And this goes into reports in Italy from doctors saying, oh, well, we were seeing cases of this pretty early on, maybe around December, and older people were getting it. Who knows what really happened? Who knows if that was the virus? They weren't actually testing for it. But the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda outlets latched onto that and said, see, it was in Italy. It was in Italy, even back then. It couldn't have come from China. It started somewhere else. Southampton University in the United Kingdom did big data in February, based on data in February. They mapped 60,000 people who left Wuhan before the city went on lockdown in China. And the map fits perfectly with the outbreak in other countries. In other words, they just based on a sample of 60,000 people, 5 million people left Wuhan before the lockdown happened. Again, the lockdown happened right around the Chinese New Year, where there's about 3 billion travel arrangements in China. Worst time you could have had a virus like this happen, especially in Wuhan, which is basically the transit hub of all of China. If you go between the north and south, you have to go through Wuhan. But anyways, they tracked 60,000 people from Wuhan who had left before the lockdown happened, and the map they formed based on these 60,000 people perfectly fits the outbreak map around the world. Number of cases we've seen in different parts of the world. And of course, this gives strong evidence that the virus started in China, which we already knew. In the United States, they are ramping up production of 2 medications. Allegedly, these 2 drugs are working when it comes to treating the virus. And there's, who knows, maybe the use of these 2 drugs in the U.S. to treat the virus could turn things around in the U.S. Meanwhile, something very interesting has happened with the Chinese military. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, test-launched a missile in the South China Sea, which of course has been where the Chinese Communist Party has been pushing to expand its borders, right? This kind of second ring, the second defense ring. They've been building these artificial islands, they've been building military bases on these islands, they've been putting rockets and such on these islands. The Chinese Communist Party's media is making it sound like this missile test in the South China Sea, they're making it sound like there's going to be a war with the United States. This is how they've been playing it up. But it seems that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to walk that back now. And keep in mind, this ties into kind of the general tone in China right now. All the Chinese propaganda systems in China are blaming the virus outbreak on the United States. They're spreading rumors that this is an attack on China. They're spreading rumors it was a biological weapon launched against China by the United States, which is ridiculous and bizarre. Global Times, however, one of the main mouthpieces of the Chinese Communist Party, basically there's Xinhua, Global Times, China Daily, well, I guess that's under Xinhua technically. Xinhua, Global Times, main mouthpieces, there's a few others of course, and then little outlets in China that follow the narratives of the main ones. They appeared to walk back this narrative. They're saying it did not take place in the South China Sea. And this could suggest that Chinese Communist Party officials don't want to directly provoke the United States right now. They don't want to send a message of war with the United States. They're, of course, mobilizing all their propaganda arms against the US right now. They're launching this huge disinformation campaign, even on US soil. If you go on Twitter right now and go into any account talking about the virus pointing to China, you're bound to see a few little Chinese, pro-Chinese Communist Party accounts barking back at people, commenting. If you go and check their accounts, a lot of them seem to be posting pretty frequently. Some of them even say People's Republic of China as the country of origin, which is interesting because Twitter is blocked in China. And so how are they accessing Twitter if they're inside China, mainland China? They're able to access it because the account they have is on an internet connection which is not held by the firewall, which means they're government accounts. Two and two together, that's what's going on. For the Chinese Communist Party, information warfare is a military action. They have what's called the three warfares doctrine. The three warfares are psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. Psychological warfare is altering the way people interpret information. It's not necessarily altering the information itself. It's altering the conclusion you come to when observing something. So, for example, China having historical ownership over the South China Sea is a psychological warfare narrative. It does not alter the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is pushing into the South China Sea and building artificial islands. It's changing the way you interpret those actions. Same thing with this virus. They're not trying to deny that the virus spread in Wuhan. In fact, some of the early propaganda pushes around this, individuals in China were saying the virus spread in Wuhan, but did not necessarily originate in Wuhan. Again, psychological warfare. They're not trying to alter the fact that the main outbreak took place in Wuhan. They're trying to alter the perception of how that happened and suggesting that, well, maybe it came from somewhere else. Psychological warfare. Media warfare is the control of outlets of information. It is the control of social media, news outlets, academics, think tanks, experts, and so on. Politicians making public statements, all of that. The whole 9 yards of outlets where people can receive information. The Chinese Communist Party has systems to attack every one of these. Over 30 US publications run paid inserts of China Watch. China Watch it's a publication of China Daily, which is not only now just an official mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party. In the United States, it's designated as a foreign mission of the Chinese Communist Party, meaning that this news outlet, China Daily, is basically, well, it is designated as a branch of the Chinese Communist Party. News outlets in the United States are getting paid by a branch of the Chinese Communist Party to publish inserts, propaganda inserts, called China Watch. That is a form of media warfare. They have the Thousand Talents program, recruiting professors like that Harvard professor. They have the Torch program, again based on this. They have the 211 program, the 973 program. Many programs targeting think tanks, targeting academics, so on, who they bring to China, sometimes give different incentives towards, and who start speaking on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, again in this narrative battle. And when it comes to compromising politicians, which is another huge thing they do, that's under the United Front Department. Not just politicians. The United Front targets all kinds of groups. Pompeo actually called out the United Front recently, and he mentioned that they have a database on all 50 U.S. governors that says what their positions are on China. Now, the United Front will go and invite politicians on trips to China. Of course, they can't take, not just like high-level politicians, even like local city council members get invited like this. In my own work, in fact, I've interviewed, they wouldn't go on record, but interviewed quite a few politicians who talked about this. Basically, because they can't accept direct gifts from a foreign government, they'll get offered, say, a 2-week, 5-star trip to China for maybe like $2,000 or $200, depending who they are. And so it's very dirty. And of course, while they're there, they'll get compromised, they'll get deals, they'll get, whatever, targeting them to try to alter the way that China is spoken about and alter the way policies are made that affect China. It's a very devious system that operates, ironically, very openly in the United States. If you go on the New York City Chinese consulate website, they have the United Front Department listed as one of their missions. That said, let's get into this whole Senate bill, this bailout, American bailout bill to deal with this virus. Of course, the Democrats blocked it. This is the second time now. In my last broadcast, I kind of saw, of course, I pointed out that their reasoning for blocking was a bit ridiculous, given that they backed Obama's, bank bailout in, I think it was 2008, which really was about the same thing, of course, trying to save the economy by bailing out businesses and giving a bit of money to Americans to kind of reinvigorate the economy. It's a very similar thing, only this time it's an actual, pandemic crisis, a very serious crisis. So I wanted to go over some of what they tried to insert into this bill, because I think it's pretty concerning. I think all Americans should know what these politicians are trying to fit into this bill that's meant to bail us out of a pandemic, basically to help Americans facing a virus, a pandemic, and it's being politicized. So Senator Tom Cotton wrote a good list. He says, it's on Twitter, 1. Corporate pay statistics by race and race statistics for all corporate boards at companies receiving assistance. 2. Bailing out all current debt of Postal Service. 3. Requiring early voting. 4. Required same-day voter registration. 5. $10,000 bailout for a student loan. 6. For companies accepting assistance, 1/3 of board members must be chosen by workers. 7. Provisions on official time for union collective bargaining. 8. Full onset of airline emissions by 2025. 9. Greenhouse gas statistics for individual flights. 10. Retirement plans for community newspaper employees. 11. $15 minimum wage at companies receiving assistance. 12. Permanent paid leave at companies receiving assistance. And Representative Andy Harris also pointed out that they've stuffed in this whole part into the virus bailout bill that would require you to not need a voter ID to get a voting ballot. What does that have to do with the virus? While Americans are facing a crisis, while they're facing a pandemic, they're trying to stuff in requirements for voting? It's bizarre. It's like they're holding the country hostage. Anyways, with that said, folks, we'll end it here. Tune in again 5 days a week. I'm going to be giving daily updates on the coronavirus. And again, we might start trying out some live broadcasts. So if you leave in the comments below if you'd like to do that. Of course, if we do live broadcasts, you can ask me questions in real time. We can discuss. I can try to answer your questions. Also, if you have questions you want me to answer on the show, leave them in the comments below. With that said, please remember to like and subscribe. We really need your support. And also click the notification bell. That'll give you updates when new videos are up. We'll be doing some interviews again soon. I know this is a bit unconventional for the show and what we've been doing, but I think based on my own background as an investigative reporter focused on China, I figured this is a good time for this when people might have a lot of questions about China. And with that said, folks, please tune in next time. See you then. Thank you.